Good afternoon, morning, or evening, whenever you guys are listening to this episode. And welcome back to the Physique Decoded. Today we have our listener question and answer episode. And I am lucky enough to be joined by superstar coach and judge, Joey Cantlin. So welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
So I figured today we're gonna have a little bit of fun. We can go through from, different questions about coaching or ICN or any type of natural bodybuilding and just get some different perspectives on answers and see the commonalities that we have and potentially some of the differences. But I appreciate having you on today and hopefully we're going to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, let's bring it on. Let's get the questions flowing.
Let's just kick this straight off. All right, so our first question that we're going to get today, I'm going to shoot this one to you.
Yep.
Dehydrating for comp day, what are your thoughts? Yes, no, good, bad, or any alternatives?
No, and not bad, very, very bad, extremely bad. Now, if you're trying to make your physique look flatter, aka worse, yes, it's great for that. But basically, unless you are actively trying to look flat for whatever reason, or arguably even a little bit softer as a result, then there's no good reason to dehydrate. Water, I would say, like, obviously we have three mechanisms for, well, not mechanisms, three different strategies for making someone look fuller, right? The three main ones, like sodium, carbohydrates, and fluid. I would say fluid's actually probably the most important one. Like, you can probably, let's say we take out sodium and carbohydrates completely and we just have water. You probably get more out of that than the alternate methods, which would just be only carbs or only sodium. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in 100% agreement with you on that one. I
Mhm.
think, from my perspective, it's, water or muscle is like, I don't know the exact percentage number, but it's like it's somewhere around like 75 to 80%.
Yeah.
Muscle is 75 to 80% water. So, um, not having water is going to decrease cell size.
Mhm.
And on top of that, you need, as you just said, with carbohydrates and sodium, you need water to transfer. You need water and salt to transfer glycogen to muscle to make you look fuller. So, I'm in 100% agreement on
Yeah.
that. I don't think we have to go through that one too much
Yeah.
more. I think,
Well, I think people do it. Well, people dehydrate for the sheer fact of trying to look dry, right? So they think that you can fill out your muscles with the carbohydrates and the sodium. Well, people basically look at like carbohydrates for muscle glycogen, sodium for more vascularity, and then decrease fluid to try and look drier. So you look fuller, you look harder, you look more vascular. But people have to remember that your body always maintains a homeostatic ratio of fluid balance, right? It's like something like 80 to 20 or 70 to 30 intracellular to extracellular. So sure, you could reduce your fluid intake, and yes, you will reduce fluid in the extracellular part of the cell, but you will also reduce from the intracellular. So yes, you might be, quote unquote drier, but you will absolutely be flatter. So all you've achieved is flattening out your physique.
absolutely. Now we are problem solvers as coaches.
Correct.
So for me here, what would be, they've also asked, if this is not something to do, what's
Mhm.
a solution for something on contest day that we could potentially, my guess is this person wants to look drier. Um,
Mhm.
so what would be your thoughts on an alternative for this person?
I think first and foremost, you have to make sure you're in really good condition. Most people that want to get drier or think that they need to be drier really just need to be leaner. It's just like the argument when people say, I needed to be fuller on comp day. No, you actually just needed to have more muscle mass on your frame. It's typically the same with wanting to dry out. You just need to be leaner. Now, there are some fluid manipulation strategies that you could use to make yourself look a little bit tighter. So I would like I say to most of my athletes, like make sure you hydrated on the day. Don't overhydrate. Definitely don't dehydrate. Just make sure you're adequately hydrated, and then maybe around I'd say between 45 to 90 minutes from when you get on stage, it wouldn't be a bad idea to reduce your fluid consumption to maybe just sips or completely cut it so you stay nice and tight in the midsection. You're not wanting to go to the bathroom all the time and you're just not feeling full and bloated. But as far as like trying to get quote unquote drier, which is maybe what this person is kind of shooting for, I don't really think there's a viable strategy for that outside of actually getting leaner.
I am in 100% agreement. And I think good point that you touched on there that I think a lot of people tend to mess up with on show day is trying to, especially non-enhanced athletes, trying to manipulate water and sodium to an extent on the day. And as you said, your body is so good at regulating these things that I do think it's a good idea to decrease fluid intake down to sips when you're thirsty, just to make sure your gums don't get super dry and whatnot, just to reduce any feeling of bloating or anything in that regard. But, in terms of, like we said, in terms of show day in the morning and things like that, like making sure that you're having adequate salt, adequate water, adequate carbohydrates, absolutely vital.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So we're in agreement there. All right. Should we throw the next question in?
Sure.
Let's see what we got. Are drop sets a necessity when you are training to failure, especially in prep? You want to start with that one or me?
You can start with this one, and I'll bounce off you.
I'm not massive on drop sets personally. No, and again, when I say this, like I'm not saying that don't ever do them, and there's always a time and a place for them. For me, I would prefer to use things that like a rest pause set where we can keep the load a little bit higher. And you can actually get a little bit more mechanical tension out of it that way. Not to say that drop sets are going to be necessarily a bad thing. I just prefer using things like rest pause sets personally. They are definitely not a necessity, I don't think. I also look during prep at and I'll be interested to get your views on this as well, but I look at the stimulus to fatigue ratio. And when I'm trying to maintain muscle mass, I generally don't take a lot of sets, maybe one set per exercise to failure in general. So I might have two working sets and one of them is going to be at 1 rep in reserve and the next one may also be at 1 rep in reserve, or it might be at failure. And then drop sets are obviously trying to go beyond failure. So there's things that I use very sparingly in improvement seasons as well as during prep, and especially in prep when you're in such a depleted phase. I tend to veer more towards this sort of 1 rep in reserve and then very sparingly use intensifiers, like could be a drop set, could be a rest pause set, could be like a mechanical drop set or something like that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I would say that just because something, like you said, it's not a necessity, but just because it's not a necessity, it doesn't mean it can't be helpful from time to time. Like you said, like intensity, like I'm not a huge fan of a lot of intensity techniques. I would say that most people actually like probably don't train hard enough. Therefore, they think that they can get away with doing these things, so it's okay. So I think let's talk about just drop sets specifically. Drop sets might be a reasonable way to drive up volume for someone who can't train heavy for whatever reason, like they might have some sort of injuries and it might help them, build up a lot more volume without having to go too intensely. However, I'd opt for something like blood flow restriction over that, or like you said, something like a rest pause. But intensity techniques might be good for someone who might be in between beginner and intermediate, where you're trying to teach them to, I guess, like mentally push a little bit harder. But let's assume that we're looking at, an athlete who is a high level trainer, has a lot of experience in the gym and knows how to push themselves. I would say that you probably don't need them much, if at all. I would say they're absolutely not a necessity, and any intensity technique for that matter should be absolutely used sparingly, especially in a contest prep. Like I said, managing stimulus to fatigue ratio, risk of injury gets higher. Your fatigue overall is going to be higher, so your ability to handle those larger amounts of volumes is going to be lower as well. So yeah, I think we pretty much agree on that one.
Yeah, I think again, it's like not, and when I say this, like I cop a little bit of flack about this every once in a while, but I can actually explain it here is like in terms of like progressive overload, like when we're, and because the question is specifically in prep, and it's we're not, especially when we get deeper into prep, we're not gaining a great deal of muscle mass, if any at all. So I tend to veer towards more matching reps, or when it's very comfortable, increasing at smaller ratios. Personally with clients, and I've found great success with that. So again, like trying to push beyond failure, especially very frequently, we end up creating so much fatigue through their everyday life, training, like you said, injuries and things like that. So yeah, so I'm not someone that uses it often, but also
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's going to be uh, could potentially be negative towards you. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's not the end of the world if you do it. But also, I probably, yeah, similar to you, I probably wouldn't do it too often, and I think I could find some better intensifiers to use instead.
agreed.
Epic. All right, next question. All right, we're gonna next one's a where are we at? Yeah, so the next one's a judging question. So we are definitely gonna let you take this one, and I might just rant about it afterwards, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Where do you see classic for natural going? So in natural federations, where are we seeing classic going? And do we need a more stricter approach across all states?
Well, I'll answer the second part of that question first. Do we need a stricter approach across all states? And I think maybe that means a more uniformed approach. So there's a set criteria for every state, for every federation, because I know there are some federations out there that do have different criteria per state. And obviously every state wants to say, like, our criteria is the best criteria and stuff like that. And then when it gets to nationals, then that kind of all goes out the window, and then whoever's on the judging panel on that table will, have the final say, obviously. And it generally comes down to what state nationals is in. They'll utilize most of their state judges. I think a way to combat that would obviously to just have a meeting and get everyone on the same page. Obviously, that probably hasn't been done at this point. I can't speak to what happens internally with federations. But the next best thing you could do is maybe have one judge per state on the judging panel. I think that's always a good approach as well, because then you can come to somewhat of an unbiased decision. Um, but as far as, do we need a more strict approach? Yes, we need a more uniformed approach across all federations. And I think something that the federation, that IFBB does really well is they have the same set of judges for almost every single show from state to state. I know they have a couple that they rotate in and out so people get a break. But for the most part, they have a collective unit that goes to every state and they do all of the shows, which I think is a fantastic idea. And I think that's something that a lot of federations can take from and use themselves. Um, so I would say, yeah, more uniformed approach would be fantastic in regards to criteria. But as far as I see where classic is headed, I think because classic physique in general across, enhanced federations and natural federations, and obviously it was popularized by, Chris Bumstead just being so dominant. And it's just such like that physique is just such a beautiful look in general, that classic physique. Bodybuilding might be too much for some people and men's physique might not be enough for some people. So classic is kind of right in the middle, which is why it's such, I guess, an attractive look for a lot of people. They're very drawn to it. Um, so I see it heading in a direction that the standard can be actually quite high. However, the problem I have with it is I think just the lack of uniformity across criteria, across judging, or across posing preferences. Like some federations might have completely different posing guidelines. For example, I know some federations you will score a 0 if you do anything that resembles a bodybuilding pose, but you can hit a bodybuilding pose and it can still look classic if you have a classical looking physique. So I think that's where we sort of miss the forest for the trees, I guess. Um, but as far as like the standard goes, it's just getting better and better and better. And as someone who like judges quite a few different federations in a couple of different countries, like it's actually making my job quite challenging. But that's good. Like we want it to be like that. We want to see the best of the best. So I think it's heading in the right direction as long as we can get on track with uniformity in terms of judging criteria. I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well on whether or not you agree or disagree.
Yeah, look, I think we're talking about classic here, but it's the same thing across
Yeah,
all all divisions. I think in bodybuilding per se, I think when you have a uniform criteria that it's all agreed upon, I think it becomes a lot more. It's easier for coaches to be able to get the right look. It's, some people look better in a bodybuilding type pose. Some people look better in a men's physique type pose. And I think sometimes classic can um, sort of blur the two a little bit, and then the poses start looking different. And then it's like, okay, well, this person, if they're actually doing X pose, then they maybe don't look the same way. So I think,
yeah,
again, like you say, like I think it's definitely, from what I've seen in the male divisions in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, I think it's the most popular division now. I think it's definitely
yeah,
more popular than men's physique, and it's definitely more popular than bodybuilding, which is awesome. Because it is a really cool division. But I think once it's, again, like you said, like when we have the posing criteria identical across the board, and we have um the judging criteria identical across the board, I think the division's really going to explode a lot more. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's a tough one to watch at the best of times. But then when we're having people, using different poses and things like that, then obviously it becomes even tougher for uh, judging and things like that.
yeah. And you made a really good point about it's a lot easier on coaches as well when we go into shows with our clients knowing, what the specific show is looking for in terms of criteria. We might be told one thing and then they go up on stage and you see something that's typically banned win, or something that has been, we've been told, oh, stay away from that, or no, this is the criteria, and they go a different way. As a coach, like that does get frustrating, and not from a place of, we just want our clients to win or whatever. We just kind of, as coaches, I think we can all agree that we just want to go into shows with a fair fight, and we want to go into shows educated and knowing what we need to put on stage. Like, I'm not going to purposely tell my client to pose the opposite way to what we've been told. So if they get on stage and then they go a completely different direction, and that's fine, saying that all my clients should win or whatever. But if we pose a certain way that we've been told to by, the website or a posing class or whatever, and then it just completely goes the other way on the day, it becomes really frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, and, the athletes are generally pretty good. And they're like, yeah, it's okay. I've just got to get better or whatever. But as a coach, it's frustrating because if we had have known that information, we could have just completely fixed it. Um, and, like contest prep coaching, it's still a business as well. And it can impact your business when your clients don't do well, even though it might not be your fault. I say this to people all the time, like a lot of people don't really care for context with this kind of stuff. Like if you have a client that gets on stage and they don't place very well, some people are going to look at that and be like, well, who was the coach? Okay, well, the coach sucks. Not necessarily true. They don't know the full story. The client may not have done what they were told. Anyway, we're getting a bit off topic
Yeah,
here, but
yeah, yeah.
um,
No, you're right though.
as, yeah, it's just it's good knowing the criteria and knowing exactly what they're looking for going through it. If we don't have uniformity with that across federations, across all states, it gets a bit blurry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting how you say that about the business side of it as well. And like I always find personally that, like, you almost don't look like you come in as, like, you and I both have been around the game a long time. Like we would be considered as experienced coaches. But then when you have clients coming in and you tell them this is what you have to do in terms of posing or whatever it might be, and then they go out and it's completely different It also makes you as a coach kind of,
Yeah,
like
it's a
look,
terrible
like,
look.
it's like, yeah, it's like, well, you told me to do this and why is, and it's like, well, it's, they're at one state, we're in a different state, and it's sometimes it's not,
Mhm.
you got to explain that, but yeah, that that's a whole thing. All right, we'll
Yeah,
jump into the next question. How does that sound?
sounds good.
All right, cool. So we're talking now, natural federations introducing wellness, and then
Mhm.
lean versus conditioned. So this is a topic that I'm very like interested in. I do enjoy this one because I'm a huge fan of wellness. Um,
Well, I'll let you kick off then, and
okay,
I'll just sit back and listen to your rant, and
yeah.
I'll build on it.
Look, I'm not gonna rant about it, but I probably will. But
Give the
I
people what they want, Rich.
Yeah, I know, right? I think the thing with wellness, and this is what I explain to clients, is like wellness is relatively new. So it's been for maybe
Hmm.
18 months in natural federations,
Yeah.
say 18, 2 years, something like that. It's new enough that they don't have pro cards or anything like that. Um, most people don't train to look like that and never have. And in natural federations, it takes a very long time to grow a substantial amount of muscle, um, let alone completely change your physique to be unsymmetrical. Like it takes a while as an enhanced athlete to get the wellness look, let alone having to do it as a natural athlete. And I think in the first 18 months of bringing it on, you get a lot of people that are potentially have higher fat distribution in their lower body and say, I fit the wellness criteria because my lower body is bigger than my upper body. So when you're first starting out and you're judging and you have a mixed bag of physiques that come up on stage, like and it could be somebody that has slightly higher body fat on their legs and but they're not, if they got properly conditioned, they may be a lot more symmetrical. And you might have other people that are a little bit more symmetrical and very lean. And maybe, you could go, now you have to find, what is what. Is it do we pick the person that looks like a wellness athlete symmetrically wise, or do you pick the person that's less symmetrical, or they're sorry, more symmetrical, uh, but you can tell that it's all muscle, and it's and
Yeah.
it's very hard, and I think it will continue to be hard for a few years because it takes a substantial amount of time to grow muscle to look that
Yeah.
way. So I think it'll get there, but I still do think we're going to be a few years off it. Like it being like where we can go,
Yeah.
okay, that's wellness. So where I was leading to that is judging it. They were saying judging it by, the wellness shape versus condition. I myself am always going to reward condition. I don't think they have to be like super shredded. However, if they're lean enough that you can see muscle and you can see some disproportion in the upper body and lower body, I think at the stage we're at right now, you have to kind of accept that nobody's going to fit it perfectly. And
Mhm.
I am looking more at the maybe slightly more symmetrical person, but you can see has really big legs. And for me personally, I'm going with that look over somebody that has a smaller upper body and bigger lower body. But we don't know if it's how much muscle's there because their body fat levels are a little bit higher on the lower body. That's how I look at it. But I think, a lot of people at the moment are talking about like, what are they looking for and yada yada. And I think, I just don't think anyone's going to hit that criteria for 5 or 6 years because it takes a long time to grow muscle. And especially on a natural athlete, that's going to take a minute to be able to get somebody to be that sort of perfect wellness shape. I don't think anybody has it yet. But yeah, what's your thoughts on the wellness category in natural federations?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. And it's actually a really interesting point that you made about the fact that you're right. Like, no, like we haven't had wellness for that long in the natural federation. So none of these younger ladies grew up like just training legs. They're like, okay, well, I've either got to be a bikini athlete, a fitness athlete, or a figure athlete. So I need to train upper body regardless. I need to be symmetrical. So you got these girls at minimum smashing their glutes and their shoulders. So then to just completely change the way they train many, many years later when they've already developed such such a muscular base in the upper body. Like I said, it's really, really hard to build muscle as it is. To just completely change your physique is another whole ball game, because then you're trying to downsize and then upsize another side. So you still have to be in a surplus because you're trying to gain somewhere. But it's like, I think people underestimate how difficult it is to lose muscle. Like, you basically have to not weight train. You would need to be in a calorie deficit. You would need to not be eating protein, and you probably need to be doing some form of cardio. But you're not going to be able to build muscle in your glutes like that. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I think you nailed it in terms of the fact that the reason it's going to be challenging is because no one has really seen this in natural federations. So it might take a few years for it to really be a category that people nail. I don't think we've seen many girls nail it at all yet in natural feds. We've seen maybe a couple. I do know that there's been a couple in Queensland, but as far as I would judge it, I think I agree. Obviously, you've judged plenty before, and I still actively judge quite a bit. And the process, when you get a division that's just a complete mixed bag, and you just kind of look at it, you're like, oh dear, okay, what do we do here? You kind of have to go, okay, who are the better conditioned athletes here? Because you need to have some resemblance or some semblance physique athlete, right? And a physique athlete gets into condition. So pretty much, not to be an asshole, but wipe off the soft competitors and say, like, okay, we can't really look at these competitors as the top right now because no one is really nailing it. So we need to go with who, I guess, ticks the most boxes and who really just gets closest to the criteria. And I'm not saying that the leanest competitor should always win. In fact, I would disagree with that entirely. But in a division where it's just such a mixed bag, sometimes shooting for the leaner look is probably the better look. And I will say, if there's any competitors listening from a judge, we go through a whole rigmarole of making these decisions. And it's not easy. And we understand that, we can't make everyone happy. We can't please everyone. And I've judged shows where competitors have been unhappy. I'll be like, hey, look, man, I can walk you through that division step by step. You're still going to be upset because you didn't win.
Yeah.
So, it's you can't always get it right per se, but it's still going to, essentially be the right decision, if that makes sense. It is tough when it's a mixed bag. And I think, like I said, we're going to have that problem with wellness for a while. So,
Yeah, I think so as well. It's almost like when you're judging 12 to 15 in placings. And it's
mhm.
you always sort of look at it and you're like, the top six is usually generally not overly hard to work out. It'll
No.
be, perfect, not quite as perfect, maybe a little something like that. But then when you start getting into the lower numbers, you essentially have to go, it's gonna be like, okay, nobody's gonna be perfect. So we're gonna have to work out, who's got more strengths, who's got more weaknesses and sort of thing. So it ends up being a case of that. And it's it's always going to come down to, it's like, well, is their condition good enough that, we can see that there's muscle, or are we going to
Mm,
go with the slightly more symmetrical person that looks like it? And I'm a person that always I like condition. So if
mhm.
there's somebody it's quite muscular in the lower body, and it has a relatively good amount of condition. For me, that I'm generally probably going to lean towards that way over the softer athlete.
Yep. I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, I think that's all right. We'll jump on to the next one. What do we got? How to get huge? We're not answering that question. Okay, here's a good one. Actually, I will answer that question very quickly for you just because it came from one of my clients. Uh, Eat in a calorie surplus, eat sufficient amount of protein, and progressively overload your weights.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
I don't really think I have anything else to
Yeah,
add.
I think we could probably, yeah, we'll just roll with that. So that question is ticked off. All right. At what point and rate do you accept loss of strength and performance in a prep? Shoot.
Ooh.
What you got?
Um, that's an interesting question, because I feel like an answer depends on so many variables. Like, you might be looking at people who are prepping for 30 to 34 weeks, and you might be looking at people who prep for 12 to 16 weeks. Um, and also we have to factor in the division. So if you are prepping for like the bikini division, you don't have to get so lean where you really got to get in the trenches. And like, if you're a bodybuilder out there or a figure competitor out there who has dieted down to striated glutes, you know what I'm talking about. So I think for maybe bikini and maybe fitness, maybe like towards the very back end, I'm talking like the last 4 or 5 weeks, if that. But bodybuilders and figure competitors, you might start to notice some minor down regulations in your performance, maybe halfway through your prep. Once the hamstrings and the quads start to really, really cut up and those glutes start coming in, you'll probably start feeling a bit of a pinch. I know personally, like back when I prepped, like it would get to a point where some days it would just hurt to walk. Um, you know,
Lose
getting
all
up
the
and having to
weight.
walk,
Yeah.
yeah, like getting up and having to walk and just the lack of energy, your legs felt like they were buried in 20 kilos of concrete, then having to go to the gym and muster up the strength to get under a barbell and squat and pick up a deadlift off the floor and then do some hit cardio. That's really, really tough. So I would say for most people, what I've observed, probably halfway to 2/3 throughout the prep, if you're dieting for an extremely lean division. I will say though, if you're a beginner or somewhat of a beginner or a first timer and you haven't been training for a lot of years, some of these people actually get stronger all the way through prep because they're still somewhat going through a bit of a newbie gains phase. And if you have elite genetics, like I'm talking elite genetics, you might get stronger and you may even put on a little bit of muscle throughout prep. It seems unbelievable, but I've seen it happen. I've seen it multiple times and we've used DEXA scans to prove it. But for the most part, I'd say halfway through to 2/3 through. But that's not to say that you should just give it into that. You should always try and match your reps if it's safe. Obviously, if it gets to a point where it's unsafe, you got to take that out. Like you have to take it because you don't want to get hurt. So yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you pretty well nailed it there. I think there's a few considerations I'll look at is, how you get those absolute assholes that just prep and barely have to drop their calories.
Yeah,
I got a couple of those at the moment. And then you
I
get
got
other,
a few. It's
yeah,
tough.
but then you get a couple other people that you've got to just like absolutely send down low as hell to get them,
Mhm.
which happens on both accounts. And I think when people that have to have their intake a lot lower tend to feel it a little bit earlier. I've got a couple girls at the moment that are just cruising along, but their calories are, we just push carbohydrates around training, and then a little bit before bed, and then they're generally sleeping well and recovering better, and they've got energy to train, and they end up essentially being fine. So I think it can be dependent on that. The other thing is, I think it's like the exercises you use too is
Yeah,
largely dependent on it. Like you might find like if you're barbell squatting or deadlifting throughout your improvement season and through your prep, like you might find numbers on those go down. And like it can be little things like having to load the bar, which just takes
yeah,
up a bunch of energy and stuff like that. So like when I have clients prepping, when I get closer, the 4 to 6 week mark, or just when they're starting to lack down on energy, I tend to try to just to move to exercises that are a little bit more stable so that we can push intensity a little bit higher on it. And
for
I think
sure. Stimulus to fatigue ratio, right?
absolutely, and I think that can help quite a lot. But again, so like there's a lot of variances to it, but like when you're getting somebody that's like having to get like down to the more muscular, figure bodybuilding, classic, men's, those sort of divisions, like getting them super, super cut. You generally always see it. Like it will always happen at some
Yeah,
point. But I think, and again, I think you nailed it where you said, don't accept it. Like,
yeah. Don't just give into it.
yeah, don't be like, because you have see some people that are like, I'm in prep and I'm so tired, so I'm not hitting my weights, and then they just actively don't go after training intensity. Whereas I think if you're still going after it, you should still be able to match, specific exercises, which I think is super important. So yeah, so you do see it, definitely does happen, but it's also something that you want to try to fight against. That's in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, and you made some good points about doing your best to mitigate it. You know, picking different exercise selection and like manipulating your nutrient timing
Yeah.
as optimally as you can. That still might not save you, but at least you are basically throwing everything and the kitchen sink at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just little things like, I might, you could move a barbell back squat to a hack squat.
Yep,
Um,
easy.
and just things like dumbbell shoulder pressing, I always say like it's tiring having to get the dumbbells up on, and like when you've got less body fat on you, it hurts more when you put the shoulder dumbbells up onto the shoulders. It takes a lot of energy. So, using machine presses and things like that, they're already sort of preset at the top for you. They can mitigate some of that energy that you can use towards the set. So I think that's a really important part of it.
Yep, agreed.
But yeah, you definitely do see it. It's always something that it creeps up on you,
For sure.
unfortunately. All right, what do we got next? We got a lot of questions for this one, man. This was great. All right, we got a couple fun ones here. I think we'll just finish off because the basketball's coming up soon. So we'll finish
Do
off
a
with
rapid fire.
do a rapid fire. We'll do two more. We'll get two more, and then one more quick conversation about something. Uh, who has the better shoe collection? I think you might win this.
Yeah,
I
now I
yeah,
would now. I think if we go back in time, you were probably at the height of your collection when I was just building mine. So
yeah,
I would say mine. Now I think we did a quick
yeah. And
comparison
and
off camera.
yeah, and I think the thing that I like about the shoe collection you got is majority of those were Jordan ones. So
Yes, and
nothing
that's
nothing
if
but
you know
respect.
shoes, you just know.
Yeah, nothing but
There's
respect.
Jordan ones and then there's hoop shoes.
There's Jordan. Yeah, the Jordan 4s are good though. Definitely a big
Yeah.
Jordan
If
4.
you if for any hoopers out there or like casual basketball fans, if you want a real character building challenging experience, go and play a full game with a pair of Jordan ones on. I dare you.
That's like walking around with no body fat on your feet.
Like it's I know like, we could sit here and we could have like the GOAT conversation about who's the greatest of all time and
That's a
all that
whole
kind
other
of stuff.
podcast.
It is, and that's a long ass podcast, by the
Yeah.
way. Um, but like one point that you could actually genuinely make for Michael Jordan is that he played in Jordan ones
That
for
is
like the
impressive.
first 2 or 3 years of his career. Now he probably had some sort of special souls in there and stuff, but man, playing in those things is like I've done it before. It was brutal.
It's like running in mud.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think he actually came back and played in them one more time and he like cut his feet up and he had blisters.
he did. He dropped 55 on my Knicks.
Fuck, I just remember seeing the picture of his feet after that. They were just like mangled
Just
and
covered in blood.
all right, what do we got? One more. Now this is from the same person. We got a basketball question. Who's the better hooper? We've never played.
Probably you. No, we've
We
never played, but I'm gonna say
we
you.
we should do that.
We should. We do need
We
to.
should do that next show that we're at. We should go down and get some shots up.
I'm keen. But
I'd
I
be
would say you're probably, but based on some of the conversations we have, you're probably a better player than me. At least now.
I
You
haven't
probably always
played in a
have been,
long
but at
time.
least now. Neither
Yeah,
have I. I had to give up after I herniated some discs in my back. I'm probably a little bit too heavy. I was a lot better when I was younger though because I pretty much stopped growing when I was like 14 or 15. Like I
yeah,
was
me too.
not
Yeah,
yeah, I was not considered short, in those days.
yeah.
So, I was actually quite a good hooper, but as I got older, I had to like move down positions. So,
So
you
some
know,
of the clients that I work with now are like, I got this one girl she's 16 and she's got to be like I started training her a couple of years ago and she was like 5'6" maybe, and she's like 6'2" now, and they're just shooting up, and I'm like it's wild. These
it's
kids.
like that thing about Dwight Howard, I think when he went from like high school to college, I think he jumped up like 8 or 9 inches in one year
Yeah,
and like turned into one of the best defensive centers ever, purely just from a goddamn growth spurt. Like
yeah.
it's just ridiculous.
And that, for everybody listening, genetics is not just a bodybuilding thing.
No, I would argue genetics is even more important in other sports.
Yeah, that's just a whole sport thing. Not
You
everybody
can be you can be a
canvas is the
great
same as
bodybuilder
the
at
other.
5'3", but you cannot get into the NBA. At least
No,
not in today's era.
no. Well, you wouldn't be able to get into the NBA at 5'3". You wouldn't be a
Muggsy
great
Bogues
you,
did.
you, you wouldn't be a great bodybuilder at
No,
6'8" either, I wouldn't think.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, you just got to pick the sport that suits the structure, right?
Yeah.
And we did the wrong one. Um, what's on the cards for you for shows for this season? Yeah, have a chat about that. Where are you judging?
So
Where have you got
yeah,
where are we
I've got
playing
I've got
basketball game?
I got quite a I got a quite a busy season. To be honest, actually, in just less than 2 weeks, I actually head back over to India. So for those who don't know, I've been going over to and from India for the last collectively about 4 years. We had our first show there in 2019, but then it got wiped out by COVID in 2020 and 21, and we went back I think early 2022. Um, so I've got another show there in just under, well, in 2 weeks. We go in just under 2 weeks to Hyderabad. So we've never been to Hyderabad. It's first one in that city, which is exciting. Then I will come back for a week, and then I will leave again to go and judge at ICN UAE in Dubai, which
That's
will be
good.
exciting. I've actually never been to Dubai. This will be my first time, so I won't be there for long, and it's mostly for work. But I'm pretty keen to check that out. And then, as a coach, the season kicks off for me around then. Like I've got competitors competing in multiple IFBB shows. I've got a competitor competing in Japan. I've got competitors competing in Melbourne. And then I pretty much have competitors competing in a show every single weekend until the end of October, across the IFBB, ICN, NBA, WNBF. And in between that, there'll be a little bit of judging at some of the shows that I don't have competitors at, for NBA. And then in November, I will travel over to America where WNBF Worlds will happen. So I'm going to have clients going over there. And then probably do a little bit of travel myself, maybe a few days in New York, who knows? Because it's nice and close to where it's going to be, which is Boston. And then I head over to India again, mid December for a show over there in Goa. That's our largest show. That's basically like the ICN Nationals variation in India. Last year we had over 450 individual competitors, which was really cool. So we want to see if we can break 500 this year. And that was a 3 day show. That was 3 days straight of judging. So yeah, it's going to be a busy back end year for me, but I'm looking forward to it. And this is the part of the year where it goes fast. So I try and do my best to stay as present as possible and soak up every moment. And something I really enjoy about comp season is like I make so many good friends in the industry as well, and I meet so many more people. I've met some of my best friends and created some of my greatest connections in this industry, and go season is like an opportunity where we all get to come together, have some awesome banter, watch some sick bodybuilding, and yeah, it's just overall sick. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be good. It's going to be a busy year for you.
Oh yeah. And
Absolutely.
next year is probably going to be even crazier because the time I usually get in the middle of the year where it's a little bit quieter, I'm actually getting married. So that's going to be stressful in
Big,
itself.
the biggest show of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, at Joey Cantlin PT. I don't have a website. I've never had a website. Um,
Overrated.
so yeah, I think so.
Don't even
Instagram
need
is
one.
basically a website these days anyway. So you can find me on Instagram there. I'm on Facebook as well if you need to message me for whatever reason, and you can always email me. Um, my email address is joeycantlinpt@gmail.com. As you said before we got on our chat, very original.
Yeah. Yeah, at Gmail, that's the way to go.
Yeah, Gmail is go.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for having you pop on today. And we didn't really disagree on much,
No,
which is
I,
which
I
is
don't I don't think so.
yeah, which is all right. We maybe need some more controversial questions that maybe we can find something we disagree on. And
Yeah,
then
maybe we'll do another one in a couple of months, and we'll get some people to try and ask some juicier
yeah,
questions.
just some like 50-50 ones that maybe we can debate on.
I'm keen. That sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you guys all for tuning in, and we will be back in 2 weeks, I believe. We have a great guest coming on in 2 weeks, so stay tuned. If you guys enjoyed the podcast today, make sure you follow. any questions, just send either one of us a DM and we can get back to you. But thanks for listening.
Thank you.